What have you learned specifically about what you've learned about onboarding and retaining face-to-face donors?
We have face-to-face fundraising teams. They have a location agreement with a place of business. There's door-to-door. There's people on the street, and then there's kiosks. And so they've built the metrics, and then they've built the safeguards to ensure that it's a good investment. There's too many variables for us to pin down like what we did right. That's the point we're trying to get to, where we can establish a baseline and start to nuts and bolts to bells and whistles.
Dana Bunke, welcome to the Sustainable Giving Podcast.
Thank you so much. Great to be here today.
Yeah, I am really looking forward to this conversation. You and I met a little bit ago and just talked through some of the journey that you've been through, not just with Easterseals, who we're going to talk about today, but as a nonprofit leader in other settings, also as an entrepreneur and a former member of the U.S. Air Force. So we're going to cover all the ground. This is not the deep 3-hour bio episode, but I do think it's fascinating how different parts of our background contribute to who we are today. And so I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Well, cool. I'm excited to talk about it. I think, honestly, I never knew that being a professional fundraiser working like to further good causes was something that you could do when you grew up. I wasn't a person that always knew what I wanted to do. And that's I ended up in the military that way. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was the youngest in a household full of kids and was like, well, let me do this. So I did it. I had a good time and enjoyed the time that I had serving. Great experiences, some lifelong friendships formed there, and crazy experience as well. But it's also how I got into nonprofit, because after I was out of active duty, I was in Jacksonville, Florida, and that's where Wounded Warrior Project was. And it was 2007. I had just moved from my last place, and I was like, oh, wow, this place is hiring. What's this about? And they were really small. And so I look back on my career and I think, what good fortune I've had to be at the places I've been when I was there, and that I was trusted to do things that I don't see happening for somebody that, was my age at the time. We'll keep that a secret. To today, and given me all this experience. And when we talk about monthly giving, like, I was at Wounded Warrior Project, but at a time when it was small and everybody wore a lot of hats, right? And then we were doing direct mail, but I really got into development out of a peer-to-peer background, but into direct response, like with monthly giving and DRTV and launching that program at Wounded Warrior Project. I was like born here for direct response, right? I didn't have a start in direct mail or digital. And I think that's where a lot of people start.
Yep. Well, and not only the Wounded Warrior Project, but just thinking about just your background across multiple programs. You also spent some time connected with the folks at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Is that right?
Yeah. Back to that good fortune thing, right? Going from Wounded Warrior Project, where it was a clean slate and could just like build everything, and then going to St. Jude, where you're sometimes at arm's length for a way that people might respond to something that you put out in the world as part of direct response. And so it was a huge place to operate within, and very different. I think of Wounded Warrior Project in my time there is like, nuts and bolts, and, ALSAC St. Jude was really more about bells and whistles and finding like, this is how we've been doing this. How do we make changes? There's so many other things to consider. It is not a clean slate. Legacy systems, all the things that make getting things done take time and a lot of coordination.
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, really building the nuts and bolts, the foundation, pouring the concrete, et cetera, right? Versus this program's already robust. How do we add to, how do we augment, how do we scale? But I think the common denominator, and I think this is where Easterseals comes in as well, is you've had multiple different opportunities to come in and be a part of helping to scale programs. And I've been thinking a lot recently about the difference between growth and scale. And it's very early on, so I'm just kind of processing even verbally with you, but it's like I do think growth is important. Growth is health. Now, growth at unchecked at all costs is not healthy. That's a whole nother episode we could record. But I do think growth is ultimately a good thing. But I think there's a difference between growth and scale. And so one of the things I want to talk about today is what does it look like to scale sustainable giving? Because for a lot of organizations, they are seeing growth. I've seen, I mean, the stats are all over the place, but the latest stat I saw from the folks at Neon One, looking at over 4,000 nonprofits, was the average nonprofit over the last 3 years has seen 36% growth in their recurring giving, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. For some of those organizations, that's growing from, you know, 30, not, 100 donors to 130 donors, right? But for other organizations, that's been growing from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. And so the thing I want to focus in on today is what does it look like to go from growth to scale? And let's start with Easter Seals. So just help set the kind of table for us. Easter Seals has been around, as I understand it, for more than 100 years now. But for someone who's unfamiliar with the organization, what's the mission? What does Easter Seals do? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So we're a national nonprofit. We have expertise in the areas of caregiving and support services across disabilities in all stages of life. We help individuals and families throughout the United States get the services they need to live more independently. We're a federated model. So I work at the national office. We've got 70 affiliates in 48 states, operating like 700 facilities and having 30 some odd thousand employees who are working in and with these communities. And so we have been around for a while. We celebrated 107 years in April. But we've been kind of, quiet in the background and really had direct mail as the fundraising
Mhm.
backbone of the organization. Like our name is Easter Seals, which was based on, a fundraising campaign that we used to do with seals that kind of look like stamps.
Yes,
So
not the cute little sea creatures, huh?
it's not. It's not. No, I mean the stamps are beautiful
Seals.
and they vary
Stamp.
throughout
Yeah.
the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But you think of stamps and like we are, trying to move past a place where people say, "Oh, I know about Easter seals, but what do you guys do?" Or, like, yeah, my
Hmm.
grandparents used to give. Like, we need to reintroduce ourselves.
Yeah. And I think this is a lesson that a lot of frankly, every organization I've ever worked with can learn from, whether you're 100 years old or 10 years old. And that is the mission needs to endure, but the model needs to change with the environment. And so for Easter Seals, the mission's endured, but the environment around it has changed. And so can you talk a little bit about why the funding model needs to evolve?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, every organization's different. Every federated model is different. Every Easter Seals is different. We at the national office, as I said, we had really focused on direct mail as a way to raise unrestricted funds. Um, there has always been a fluctuation, I think, in communication and collaboration between the national office and our network of affiliates in terms of fundraising focus, messaging. And so, there's also been a lot of, changes at Easter Seals, especially in the 2000s up until now. And really, I don't think until 2019, 2018 did we come together as an organization, and this kind of predates my time there, but really set on a path to say, we need to diversify our revenue streams. We are at risk because we're so dependent on direct mail, and we have this challenge where people don't know who we are. So what do we do about these things? And so, that was pre-pandemic. And so it's been a journey since then to add on fundraising channels and to work through leadership transitions and growing how we work with our affiliates to be able to fundraise and be more effective and come together really on what that should look like.
Yeah. Okay, so call it 2018, 2019, the organization realized it needed to diversify its revenue, its model, needed to begin prioritizing recurring giving, which, by the way, there must have been something in the water in 2018, 2019, because multiple other guest organizations that have been on this show that
Yeah.
are seeing some real fruit in recurring giving. It was around that same window that they were like, we need to diversify our funding. And I do think, and I've written a whole book on this, I do think part of that was seeing what was happening with the subscription economy and how folks were adopting that. But what is it that caused Easterseals to begin prioritizing recurring giving? Like,
Yeah.
was there anything even on the sort of the organizational beliefs or side of things that needed to happen to make that shift?
I think it started out as a prioritization on, diversifying revenue streams, not necessarily recurring giving.
Yeah. Okay.
I think recurring giving came in because we had a development staff that was in place at the time that had some experience with this and with face to face specifically. And I was actually consulting at the time, so I knew that they were evaluating channels to go into for direct to monthly acquisition. And so I had engaged with them a little bit again, just kind of, a friend of a friend type conversation about
Mhm.
what it would look like to do a DRTV test. And at the end of the day, they ended up going with face to face, and they started that in 2021. And that really has to do with, you know, one person who said, this is what we should be doing. And we knew we need to diversify our revenue streams. Let's do this. And then I think we really kind of went all in on sustainable giving when our current CEO, Kendra Davenport, um, came on at Easterseals because she's had experience. She's a development CEO. She's got a lifetime of experience in fundraising, and she knows the value and what it does for an organization to have a strong recurring donor program. And that's like from soup to nuts, right? She calls it the back of house, but there's, it's an ecosystem and she understands it. And that's one of the reasons she was hired at Easterseals because the board understood the challenges about the lack of
Mhm.
recognition. And they also knew that we needed to be in a better place long term and a sustainable future, have that locked in for Easterseals. And the way to do that is sustainable giving.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes sense. Okay, so there was this idea that we need to diversify revenue, and
Yep.
then that ultimately led to sustainable giving to recurring giving. And specifically, the decision was to invest in face to face first. We're going to get there in a second, but I
Yeah.
just want to kind of fill out the picture for folks because I think
Yep.
there's multiple nuggets that they can draw from. So you mentioned being a federated model. I want to talk
Mhm.
about that for just a second because not everybody understands what that means.
Yeah.
So Star Trek Federation, like what are we talking about? Sorry, had to be the geek there for a second.
Totally.
But so you mentioned, Easter Seals operates through a federated model. How does that
Yep.
work? What does the fundraising look like between the national organization and local affiliates?
Yeah. Well, we were coming out of a period of time where there had been a couple leadership transitions in a short period of time. And I think that the network and the national office and in the middle of the pandemic, we're trying to reconnect on how best to come together and fundraise, how to message, how to do all the things. I think transparency and a huge increase in communication, and actually going to visit affiliates and understand their model, right? I said it
Mhm.
before, if you've met one Easterseals, you've met one Easterseals because no two are the same. And so literally we provide programs and services for disabled people and caregivers. I mean, that's a huge population. And so what happens in Washington state might be very different than what happens in Florida, where there are 5 affiliates and there's 1 in Washington state. So, um, you know, that's just an example. But um, yeah, I think the technical pieces matter in terms of how you build a program, but the leadership challenges are all related to alignment. and finding a way to communicate and come together with a lot of people that have, you know, they see things differently for a reason because their whole setup is different and
Yeah.
unique to what they're doing. So that was really where we had to start. And so that was from the top down, right? It started with the CEO, Kendra, and we've got a lot of really solid people who are good at bringing people in. And you can't do something and expect it to work if it just happens at the national office, right? There's no lone genius. We need everybody. Otherwise, it's the wheels are going to fall off and we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. So, organizations listening, and we've worked with multiple organizations that have a very variations on, hey, we have the national, and that's the sort of maybe responsible for certain things, and national and brand, and so on and so forth. But we also have affiliates or local offices that are distributed. That, to your point, they may even have different programmatic services. They may do their own fundraising. So just while we're on this topic, what makes recurring giving specifically either more complicated or, well, there are some complications. So what makes recurring giving more complicated in a federated model?
Yeah.
But then also on the other side of the coin, are there opportunities that represents?
Yeah, I think so. So I think one of the primary things that makes recurring giving difficult in a federated model, um, with development in general in a federated model is a lot of times, and if you're not in a federated model, you don't necessarily know about this, but there's usually a rev share between the national office and the affiliate or the chapters or local local Easterseals. And so um that is complicated and it looks different for everybody. And I did a tour talking to other federated model development professionals that I know to say, what does it look like at your shop? And there are some people who are, all over the place, and some people who are just kind of really 50-50, some people that are calibrating and it's really, specific and wonderful. And so like development and fundraising, no matter what it is pretty complicated with the
Hmm.
federated model. I think with monthly giving, I think it's not more complicated, and it depends on the setup, right? Are you all on the same CRM and using the same fundraising platform? Is it different for everybody? We happen to be at a place where it's different for everybody. And so what we offer at the national office and I'll start with what we moved away from.
Okay.
We moved away from one size fits all solutions because that doesn't exist for us. And so um we offer toolkits, right? If you want to do monthly giving, and we will lead the charge with amplification of the message and the invitation to join the all access monthly giving program. You can use these things. You can use it on your property, right? The worst that's going to come of it is we're going to have to do some forensic work to find out what happened with a donor who signed up for your program and not my program, and we
Yeah.
have to have a conversation about a specific donor, which that's where we want to be anyway.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the hardest part, I think, with monthly giving is coordination. I think development and fundraising specifically is complicated for other reasons. And what was the other part of the question?
And then, yeah, where does the opportunity? Are there opportunities that presents that maybe people might underestimate?
Yeah, and I think that it's a big opportunity, which is the local amplification or surround sound and the conversations that can happen in an affiliate's backyard. Like we have a monthly giving program, and an affiliate had, it's new, right? And people don't know how to respond to the national office presenting Easterseals as, one organization to a huge audience, right? And so
Hmm.
there might be a tendency among affiliates to say, no, this is what we do different. But when you're having that conversation, the first thing you do is you say, yeah, that's us. And this is what we do here. And it's a way to start a conversation locally with a donor who saw something because it was on a mass market channel potentially. And so I think the opportunity is for um, you know, the local organizations to really leverage what they know about what the national office is doing and use that as a reason to start a conversation, or if they're in those channels to amplify the message or to put their own kind of flavor out there and just kind of ride the wave, right? We want a rising tide. That's what we always hear with DRTV. Rising tide lifts all boats. So it doesn't just happen.
Yeah. Well, and what I'm hearing is, if you, because a lot of organizations, again, listening, have some version of a federated model or a partnership model or a diffused model like that. The local, we'll call them local, can leverage the national. Like, hey, they can leverage the brand of the national, and on the other end, they have the chance to make the to be those boots on the ground and
Yeah.
to be that presence within their community, and it's can be a win-win.
I think too, like going back to that like good fortune piece that I mentioned earlier, I'm at Easterseals at a time when we're all kind of moving in the same direction. There are people there that have ties to things that are considered legacy, but they're open to like seeing the evolution. And then we have people there that are new, that are doing new things. And so to have a partner as you're doing something like launching a monthly giving program, or DRTV, and having to do those things and have huge network wide meetings about what a message should be. I had a really good partner, our SVP of brand marketing and communications, Kat Wallace Knowles. She likes word puzzles, right? And so we would drill down to get really specific feedback about how should things change or what do we want to communicate to people. And again, it goes back to there's no lone genius, right? There are like
Mm.
teams that you work with, and there's groups that you kind of get down to the fine point of things, and you make the changes and you explain the changes that you make and you explain the changes that you didn't make, because it's not about making all the changes that are suggested, because sometimes you just can't. It doesn't make
Yeah,
sense, or it's not direct response, and people don't love direct response, so you have to have those conversations.
yeah. That makes sense. Well, and I think so. Let's come back to that journey of building the acquisition, that the engine of sustainable giving for Easter Seals, and predates you, but you mentioned that you really started face to face fundraising, as I understand it, in 2021. Why did the organization begin there, and then what has face to face done for the organization? Over the last 5 years, we're going to get to some other channels you've added
Yeah.
and strategies, but let's start with face to face.
I think face to face was one, it's a wonderful channel. There are so many benefits to face, reaching younger audiences, getting more information about what the donor interaction and boots on the ground, and hearing from people about why they want to or don't want to support your organization. Um, it's also kind of I think it was a lesser path to resistance, because it didn't require the work that was required to launch something more visible on a national scale like DRTV. The organization, the national office, the affiliates weren't ready and weren't in a place to communicate and collaborate, going back to those things,
Hmm.
on messaging and what this, you know, new introduction should look like,
Yeah,
which was really what DRTV was. So, it was tried and true. It is tried and true. And it's dependable, and it was always explained as though it's an investment, right? Any sustainable program is an investment. It's um, you have to look past the short term.
yeah. Well, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, that really created a substantial base now for you with regards to recurring giving.
It did, and it gave us kind of the backbone to say, look, this worked here. It happened within the time frame that we said it would. It is going well. And this was something that was just kind of eh, it was just running in the background as some major, organizational transitions were happening. And so it was it was just a great piece to have in place as those transitions were happening, and to be able to position us for future conversations in 2023, 24, 25, to go back and say, look, this started here in 2021. It's doing the things that we said it would. You were patient, you waited, and it delivered. So these other things are kind of similar.
Yeah. I want to move in just a moment, and we'll talk about DRTV. I'm excited about that. But sticking on face to face, because for some people, for some organizations, are like, "Yep, been doing that for a while." But for a lot of organizations, particularly in North America, they're like, "What do you mean face to face?"
Right.
So canvassing, there's different languages used. There's different types of face to face. But what
Yeah.
have you learned specifically about, well, one, for our listeners, just kind of define face to face, at least as far as you guys use it. And then I'm specifically interested in what you learned about onboarding and retaining face to face donors. Because
Yeah.
if a fundraiser has heard of face to face, one of the chief concerns is churn, right? Is
Right.
are they going to retain? Are they going to give beyond that first gift? But just for our listeners, kind of define face to face, and then talk about how you guys handle that retention.
Yeah. So face to face or canvassing, right? Like you don't know what you don't know. I came in and we were doing face to face, the type of face to face that we do, which I didn't even really kind of dig deeper into until the last year or so, was we have face to face fundraising teams. They have a location agreement with a place of business. That approves them to be out there fundraising on behalf of Easterseals. And so that's one type. There's door to door, there's people on the street. And then there's kiosks, which is kind of similar to what we're doing, except it's kind of a mobile station that's located inside of a, a partner location, which is not dependent on, like, you don't have to have a corporate partnership with any of these locations just to have the permission for a fundraising team to be there.
Yeah.
So we're there in person, on site, rather, so to speak. And I think, um, you know, the face to face channel and the agency partners there knew what they had to do to make the program make sense in terms of churn. So you don't really see a face-to-face partner that doesn't have a clawback, right? So it's basically guaranteeing a gift, guaranteeing a certain cost per donor. There's typically a breakdown of with face-to-face giving frequencies, which is, it takes a lot to wrap your head around when you're looking at the financials and the projections for that, but monthly, quarterly, and annually. And so they've built the metrics, and then they've built the safeguards to ensure that it's a good investment for the organization. So they went about solving it that way. Obviously the other piece to that is, how do you continue to talk to these donors that were acquired because their relationship started or continued or really progressed with a conversation with somebody? We feel like from what we know and from what we hear, they behave differently than donors acquired in other channels, or that kind of progress into this, sustainable relationship with your organization. So we don't know. We're trying to figure that out. We've done some things as we've continued to expand our presence across channels and transition and evaluate platforms that we're on, so that we can get more sophisticated in identifying, well, this person came here, let's try this certain treatment or communication. And honestly, there's been so much change with all the things that we've been doing in the last 4 years that there's too many variables for us to pin down, like what we did right. And so that's the point we're trying to get to, where we can establish a baseline and start to nuts and bolts to bells and whistles.
Yeah.
How do we,
Yeah.
this is the full thing.
That's a theme. That's a theme. Well, and I guess that should be encouraging for some folks, but you got started. It wasn't as if the organization just had it all figured out. It's like a progressive process. It's a decision that leads to next steps, that leads to another decision, that leads to next steps. There's a generosity crisis in North America. The number of individuals giving to charity is on the decline. And for nonprofits that rely on the generosity of everyday people, this is an alarming and discouraging statistic. But amidst these challenges, a new opportunity has emerged. The subscription economy is transforming behavior. It started with the way we consume, and it is now transforming the way we give. The subscription economy has changed everything. In the rise of sustainable giving, I share core elements to building a thriving, sustainable giving program, including 6 key shifts driven by the subscription economy, understanding donor motivation, crafting an ongoing value proposition, getting your technology stack right, designing your program, and growing recurring giving. Recurring giving is now more accessible to more charities than at any time in history. The question is, are you going to take advantage of it? As I've hinted at, as we've talked about, you did add direct response television
Mhm.
in 2023. So why was DRTV the next step?
I think I credit this as one of the reasons that the board was so engaged with Kendra as CEO. She has a strong development leadership background, had been at organizations, is a strong supporter of direct response, monthly giving, and DRTV. And so she went in there and she was Kendra, right? And anybody that knows her or has heard her speak, she's passionate when she's talking about something, and she's passionate about monthly giving, about making organizations sustainable. She's passionate about DRTV. She knows, like I do firsthand, what it can do for your organization. And it's direct response, but the attributable response or the impact across other channels that um, you can't really quantify, but you know it's there. You can't uh, you can't you can't see that work and then not be, the biggest fan of it. And so,
Mm,
um, yeah, it really started, I think, with Kendra selling it to the board,
okay.
and then with so much other kind of transition that was happening internally at the time.
So thinking about DRTV as a channel,
Yeah.
one, it'd be helpful again, just, for the sake of donors, like where are they experiencing that, or our listeners, what are they experiencing? What does that channel really look like? And then what role do you expect it to play in really growing sustainable giving for Easter Seals?
Yeah. So it's direct response television, DRTV. Uh, it's the big screen at home, right? There's a lot of devices that you can see your commercials delivered on, and there's streaming or traditional television. These are all different things. At the end of the day, if you're an end user and you just see something on your television, you might not care to put all that together, right? You're just somebody having an experience, and so DRTV is a huge brand builder. Part of the reason for that is that they're 2-minute spots. That's 120 seconds where you can really talk to someone. We kind of see a connection here, or they assume there's a connection between video really works, right? That's why we think face to face works, because people have the benefit of having a conversation and asking
Mhm.
questions. And for a long time, it was thought the DRTV was really effective because of the call center aspect. People could call in, they could ask questions, there would be a witness to their philanthropy, and they could talk a little bit about why it was important to them, because people want to do that. And so, um, it's 2-minute spots. The idea, I think at one point in time, was you really need to get this creative perfect, and then you just kind of run with that. Well, now with the way things are, TV is about optimization as well, and so you want to produce more than one of these 2-minute spots. You air them in kind of this kind of core network group where your viewers typically are based on response and what early tests tell you, and then you just, like any other kind of direct response thing, you produce other versions to try and beat that control.
Yeah.
Um, people scanning became a bigger response method for people during COVID. We had tested that, or I'd been at places and tested that before, but it was really the phone that people picked up, or the unique URL that people go to.
Mm,
But then there's the typical backdrop that you have for any recurring program, with how you charge their gift, how you thank them, the cadence in which you communicate with them, and how you engage them. That all kind of looks the same. And I think for a long time, the idea with any sustainer program, less face to face, is you get them in and you talk to them just a little bit differently, and you send them the packages, the communications that, people respond to or really tend to appreciate. But you keep them at a more of a minimum, and you keep them safe, right? You kind of take them out of your um, big database, and you kind of hold them a little closer.
Okay. Well, I think one of the questions is how do you evaluate DRTV? I know you mentioned brand building, so you've got this sort of, okay, we're doing these spots, we're putting them out in front of hopefully the right audiences. How do you suggest an organization thinks about results? How do they measure that value?
Yep.
Um, and what does that look like?
Yeah, it's such a big and ongoing conversation. It's the primary purpose of this program, you always have to go back to that, is to acquire monthly donors, to acquire sustainers. And so from the performance standpoint, it's about cost per monthly donor. And second to that is going to be cost per acquisition, how many donors in general. Um, and again, it was such a high focus for me prior to my experience at Easterseals with direct response and seeing just strong results there. At Easterseals, it has really been, but you always at the other places too, it's always, equally about trying to measure the halo impact or the indirect response on other channels and,
Mm,
making people see you more.
yeah.
But at Easterseals, it was really, um, measuring again, we had a big lack of activity. And that thing that we started right now to get to us to the point where we launched DRTV, and you talk about the runway for this. These are conversations that started 7 years ago to get us
Yeah.
to the point, where people were ready for the idea. At Wounded Warrior Project, uh, my boss at the time, John Hamry, um, we did the test. The test went great. He's like, "No, no, 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 keep on spending. Go ahead and spend the budget. We'll get incremental revenue from the board." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, let's do that." So we did that. We didn't get extra money. We looked at the results the following year and saw a huge drop off in web visits to the main website, woundedwarriorproject.org, when we went off air from television. And then it spiked back up as soon as we went back on. And we could
Okay.
really see it because there was a lack of activity in other places, because we were still kind of growing and getting in to households then too. So at Easterseals, very similar experience in that we had just kind of this period of time where there was not a lot of activity or traffic to the website. We went on direct response television. We saw those spikes. We saw the increase in activity. That was, in our pilot stage. We went off air because post pilot we had some things to do before we launched in 24. We saw the same exact trend
Uh-huh.
where we went on in 2024, website visits just absolutely through the roof. And so, it goes back to what was the baseline before, what's the baseline now? And it goes back to like attribution, multi-channel attribution. Nobody has solved attribution. It is, cross screen measurement, whatever you want to call it, right? Nobody's got it figured out, but
Mhm.
you have to go on some assumptions based on what you see. And from the other channel performance and from the activity we saw on the web and the lift that came on when we were on air and on television, it's undeniable. And
Yeah.
so finding ways to prove that is what you go back to. But outside of that, eh, prior to Easterseals, it was all about cost per monthly donor, cost per acquisition. When you talk to the marketing team, right, it's cost per media because they want to know how many impressions they got, right? There's slices and dices of information that's helpful to everybody,
Yeah.
and that only makes your job easier when you're trying to find out more things.
Yep. That's super helpful. So with Easter seals, you're a couple years in on the DRTV, so you've layered that in to the strategy, and we'll talk about some other channels to wrap up this section in a moment. But what are you seeing so far? And how would you like if there was another leader in your shoes? How would you advise them to think about kind of these channels as they work together?
Yeah, I would say that it's important when you are evaluating, it's going to sound crazy, but not to read too much into, certain results, right? It might not be the obvious thing in the beginning, especially when things are still coming together. Sometimes
Mm,
things just need a little bit of time. Sometimes there are market factors that make things look different than you would have anticipated. And so I think you want to get to a point where you can make fast decisions. But until you've reached that point, it's more important to stay the course and keep your focus on getting the things done that are really key to being able to execute on your vision.
Mhm. Yeah, that's just and I've faced this in other types of direct response fundraising. I don't have a thought specifically on DRTV sort of versus, say, face to face, but they are what, sort of the, kind of attribution is totally different across the
Yeah.
2, and so that does make them tricky to be like to really compare from an apples to apples perspective.
Oh, yeah.
But as I understand it, just to be clear for our listeners, you really have layered in. You've got face to face, continues to go. You've
Yep.
brought in DRTV. And this is where I'd love to transition. We talked a little bit about digital, as well as text messaging, which is increasingly a bright spot with the organization that
Yep.
we're working with. I'm curious, um, how are digital and fact and text messaging fitting into your broader journey today?
Yeah, they're definitely an important part of it, right? We have other programs. Direct response and integrated marketing. So the direct response piece is pretty obvious, but integrated marketing is, those other audiences, those specific audiences, and pulling those into the communication and engagement plan. So, we've got email and we've got digital media that we're engaged with. And email has kind of always been an in and out program at Easterseals since people were doing emails in 2009 and early 2000s. But um, digital media we had kind of been in and out with, and that we launched in 2023. Um, and it's working for us, right? We have spent so much time kind of in the shadows of direct response and focused on direct mail that a lot of times I think as an organization we benefit from um, you know, so much opportunity to catch up and do things that other organizations have been doing and kind of get in front of audiences. I mean, there's some challenges with that, right? Building an audience and things like that, um but otherwise it's a necessary component to our overall engagement plan, and being able to identify these audiences and create um journeys for them that we can really kind of begin to understand who they are and their motivation, so that our ultimate goal, back to being a federated model, is to take this direct response file, grow it as big as we can, identify the donors um, that are maybe most beneficial for our affiliates to connect with, and then to make those introductions so that then they can steward those donors, you know, on the ground and develop a more meaningful relationship that hopefully will lead to, continued giving and potentially, legacy opportunities. So,
Wow.
you know, yeah.
I wanna talk a little bit about, people think about monthly giving, recurring giving, and obviously, obviously tend to equate that with sustainability and funding. And, one of the things you've said is that sustainable giving is not a tactic, it's a strategy. What changes when an organization begins treating it that way?
Um, they're being intentional about it. They recognize the value of it. They know that it's important for them for today and for the future. It's an investment, right? They've been asking questions for the last 3 years about, was this a good idea? And you kind of get over that hill, and then it's the opportunity to continue to have that happen, right? I think it's um, monthly giving is not a tactic; it's a strategy, and monthly giving um, is the way a person pays. But when they start to give to you in a sustainable way and in a recurring basis, that's a behavior change for
Mm.
them.
Where should the sustainable I think about sort of structure and responsibilities, but where should sustainable giving sit within an organization? I'm just
Um,
giving you all the easy questions, by the way.
that's an interesting one. I mean, I think it should sit with, I mean, it kind of sits, it's that protected group, right? But it still kind of is a shared group because you need to work with other groups to make sure that they stay protected.
Hmm.
Um, to me, it's always sat on a mass market or direct response fundraising team because of um, the size of the organizations that I've been at, right? But being in a federated model opened my eyes to what it really looks like to be a person working locally as a development professional, chief development officer, and growing a program because you make an ask at an event, or because you put up a billboard, or you have your own kind of small email program, right? And that makes me even a bigger a fan of monthly giving because it just looks so different. But yeah, I think in my experience as always working at a national nonprofit or at the national office, um, sitting in the direct response or mass market
Yeah.
development team. Yeah.
Yeah. Also thinking about just the program itself. It's a named program, correct?
Yep. Yep.
And what's it called? When did you give that name, and why did naming
Yeah.
it matter?
So, it's called the All Access Monthly Giving Program. The idea of all access being around all access, making everything accessible, right? That's
Okay.
one of the
Yeah.
reasons Easterseals exists. As well as, there's an idea with the monthly giving program that you kind of get behind the scenes, or you're kind of more close to the organization. So, what does that all access pass look like to understanding what's happening with your sustainable gift and your investment in this organization? And so it came about as a result of an exercise with our brand marketing team. We did an email test. It was like all access or care club, right? Our agency partners said care club was better, but we really wanted all access. So we tested it in email and it won by
Yeah.
like 95%. We let our donors vote. We were happy with the results. And so we really kind of talked about what it means to be this all access. And then prior to this, it's I think people know and talk about it. You it's better to say join us than it is to say make my gift recurring or make my gift monthly. People want to be invited into something. At Wounded Warrior Project, we had Advanced Guard, and I got to work on the development of that program as well. And then, of course, St. Jude has Partners in Hope. And
Yeah.
so different stages for all these places, but it is important, I think, and it helps you develop your messaging and talk to the person in a way that makes them feel, again, as we find more and more, and you hear more and more, especially with younger donors, they don't want to just give. They want to feel like they're part of something. Community is important, right? And so how do we build a sense of community with this special type of donor?
Yeah. Just a very specific question. Do you refer to it as all access monthly giving? Most of the time, like how much do you mention? Because one of the tensions I hear from organizations, one is should I name our program? And I wrote a whole chapter on that in the book. And the short answer is yes. There's just some
Yeah.
pitfalls to avoid and some things to pursue. But once you have a name, one of the other challenges is like, is that a product? Is that like a club? Are you really just saying you want me to give?
Yeah.
How do you think about that when you say, do you say join all access, become an all access member? Or is there more sort of donor language in there, like become an all access monthly giver or whatever?
Yeah. Well, so it's kind of the tools at your disposal for direct response. You have to have a
Okay.
call to action. Your call to action, you want it to be specific. And so that's because you just want a person to take an action. And so, as specific as you can be with the question, that's more likely to result in the action that you want to see. And so, when you're looking at direct mail, or when you're looking at DRTV or digital, where it's more of a one-way conversation, you're just asking them to do something. You do most often see it, I think almost always, as all access monthly giving. Now, if someone picks up the phone because they saw a DRTV commercial and they say, well, I'd rather give, quarterly. Is that something? Absolutely, we can do that accommodation. It's something that you absolutely have the functionality to offer, but because you don't want to give a person too much to think about when maybe you're catching them at a moment where they're feeling like you're connecting with them on a story, on a person, just get them to take the action. And if they ever call and need to make a change or, want to talk about doing it differently, you're certainly open to that conversation. And that is why with, we say for face to face, join the all access giving program, right? They have certain goals for the type of frequency that they want to acquire, whether that's monthly, quarterly, or annual. We don't allow one time gifts. A lot of programs don't. But there you have the benefit of having a conversation, asking questions. There's certain areas where face to face is more flexible, and there's certain areas where face to face is less flexible. With most direct response, where it's us just communicating out, we're asking people to do something specific, and if they respond in a certain way, then of course we can probably do that.
Yeah. 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 Well, hey,
But I get the rub in a way that
Yeah.
I think too. My view, my time with face to face is less than DRTV, and so it's been a really great learning experience for me, and it is different. But yeah, there's just little tweaks, little differences.
Well, actually, it's a perfect question. One of the last questions, I know we're coming up to our time here, that I wanted to ask you is, if you step back, you've really helped build and scale programs at several major nonprofit organizations. We talked about Wounded Warrior Project, about St. Jude, All Sac St. Jude, and then now Easterseals. When you think about programs that have really scaled, what are some things that are common? So one thing I'm hearing from you is there's just an organizational belief and commitment to it. Like this is not like a little pilot that we're going to try, and if it doesn't work in 2 months, oh well, I guess we're not going to do it. So there's a belief in it. I've heard
Yeah.
there's some experience that takes. Like this is not just people, this is their first rodeo. In your case, for example, it was your first rodeo the first time, but
Yeah.
now you've developed some experience. Is there anything else that comes to mind as you think? Because I think we have people listening to this show that are in all different places, but one of the common places, especially for what I would call mid-sized to larger organizations, is there's a level of kind of plateau that they often hit where it's like, well, yeah, we've got 10,000 recurring donors, but or we have whatever the number is, 1,000, 100,000, doesn't matter. But they're kind of they're not scaling, they're not growing from there.
Yep.
And that's what I just, it's like, man, you've been in a couple of situations that have done that scale, and I'm sure have also plateaued and all that as well, right? So I'm always curious as to what are some of the common denominators among organizations or leadership or cultures that lead to that kind of
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah. Thanks for reeling me back in on that one. I think it's commitment. I think it's a commitment, commitment, commitment. It is about, you're asking the donor to make a commitment, and as an organization, you have to be committed also. And so it goes to, making the case and having the patience to continue to communicate the value when you're in, the early stages, to being committed to, well, how do we make retention better, or what channels do we test? What kind of things can we do to upgrade existing donors? What are the people who responded but maybe gave a one-time gift? What can we do to engage those people? So it's a commitment to continue to keep it a priority, whatever that means. And so, we're coming out of a build phase, and now we're trying to again build those benchmarks and understand where do we go from here. And this is really about kind of bringing together a lot of the work that's taken place over the last couple of years. So stay the course again, 7 years later, and we are where we said we wanted to be. And we're continuing to push forward with that. So commitment, stay committed. You're asking people to commit, and you as an organization have to commit as well.
So good. So good. As you think about the future of fundraising, and I'm going to kind of end with this one. you've been in this sector for a minute now. As you think about the future of fundraising, what gives you hope?
It's people and organizations lifting other people up, and it's a source of hope. And I think a lot of people will continue to see the good work being done that way, and people want hope. I want hope. Um, I think that I'm inspired by the idea of fundraising and development for nonprofits being the third sector, right? And in a lot of other places, it's just the third sector. And in the United States, it looks a little bit different. But I think as an industry, we are finding ways that we can come together and advance our objectives to raise money to do more good and to involve other people that work within the nonprofit sector in that work. Which I think, again, kind of going back to some of the other things we talked about, it's about um, communication and really the technical aspects of the work don't necessarily change, but the alignment is what's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, well said. Well said. I come back to the journey that we are all on and how our paths intersect, which is super fun. I love that our path is intersected. I love how you've been able to draw on your background, whether that's military background as an entrepreneur and as somebody who, like most of us, kind of stumbled into this nonprofit space. And I'm grateful that you're applying who you are and what you've learned to helping grow and to be able to share with others is a huge blessing.
Well, thank you for giving me and others a platform to do so. I am so happy that our paths crossed as well. And this has been just a really fun time talking to you today.
Absolutely. And I hope for our listeners, you've picked up something today that, especially as you've thought about the different kind of circumstances that Dana and their team, that early decision to invest, the commitment to stick with it, and to take some pretty big swings because these channels are not, something you step into lightly. And so to see that fruit and the continued efforts has just been encouraging. And I hope if you're listening today that you've learned something and that you can go and apply it. Until next time. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Sustainable Giving Podcast. I hope you found the information helpful and that you're able to walk away with insights that you can use to start building a steady stream of recurring revenue for your organization. For even more resources to help you build a thriving recurring giving program, go online to sustainablegiving.org. That's sustainablegiving.org. And lastly, if a leader comes to mind that you think would benefit from this episode, would you do me a favor? Would you share this episode with them? Just that little act could be the difference they need to start growing sustainable recurring giving for their own organization. Until next time, thanks for joining us.